Hi everyone and welcome back to SSW TV. I'm Adam Stevenson and I'm here today with Dino Esposito. Dino's a prolific author and speaker. He literally wrote the book on enterprise mobile development and is now a technical evangelist with JetBrains. Welcome, Dino.
Yeah, hi everybody from another part of the world, but completely different. Just a new day started here in Europe. You're at the end of the day, probably down under, but we'll try to make a match out of this time zones.
Excellent. So Dino, you're working on lots of mobile applications at the moment. When building mobile applications for the enterprise, what's the most important lesson you've learnt?
Oh, yeah, it's tough. Actually, it's tough. Um, Put down in terms of lessons, would like to summarize by saying that you never have to stop at what appears to be obvious at first time. In particular, and focusing more in general on the web part of the mobile, which I think is far more important for all companies, all enterprises, than just the mobile native apps like iOS, Android, this kind of stuff. Speaking of websites, I think that the most obvious approach that you find pushed by the industry, by evangelists of any kind, is towards responsive web design, which is a methodology that definitely powerful in the sense that it allows you to build with a single code base, a single set of pages to address the needs of various devices. And this seems to be obvious and, wow, the perfect solution. When you look at it from a slight different perspective, or when you start using that in the more critical types of websites, the lesson I've learned is that it's not always the ideal solution, and it's not even that mobile friendly as one should assume at first. So this is really the most important number one lesson that I have learned in the past 2 years of mobile development.
Wow. Okay, so you don't believe that responsive web design answers most of the requirements when building sites targeted at mobile devices?
I think that with through responsive web design, you can definitely address some of the concerns, but responsive web design is not absolutely the only answer. It mostly depends on the nature, the characteristics, the functionalities, I would say the features in general that you expect out of the website you are going to build. Let me give you a concrete, immediate example that probably allows to help people, establish and make sense of the dichotomy when, yes, when it's good and when it's not that good. If you have a website that is mostly read-only, for example, a portal that presents news on whatever topic, that's probably good to have responsive web design, because with a single set of pages and with the magic of CSS and moving things around and flowing things around the browser container, you can definitely organize the content in a way that fits the 15-inch screen of a laptop, as well as the 8-inch screen of a tablet or a smaller inch screen of a smartphone. When it comes to something like an e-commerce, whatever e-commerce can mean, but a website that requires to have interaction, deep, tough interaction with users, and you have a workflow to work users through. Think, for example, of a booking website. It could be booking a course on a tennis club, it could be booking a hotel room, whatever that requires several pages and several questions to be asked, several steps. Well, that is really hard to organize in a way that looks the same or nearly the same across screens of significantly different sizes. For example, you can have on a laptop, on a large screen, you can have 3 or 4 blocks of UI input forms displayed at the same time, and that saves users from navigating from pages to pages. But when you try to move that back to a smartphone, You probably need to have physically different pages, and you have navigation between pages, and that makes for a completely different user experience.
So,
Now, yeah, no,
I
just
guess,
one more
oh yeah,
point. Yeah, no, that's it. At that point, responsive web design, which is essentially based on CSS, and CSS can only hide things or move things around. It cannot easily, at least, give you a way to mix together different, physically different views. So you need more and different, more powerful and different.
okay. So MVC4 added some great functionality for rendering different views for the same action method. So MVC4 mobile views. So I could have a, an iPhone targeted site and a mobile site and a desktop version of all of my different views. So do you think this is one of the key features for mobile targeting?
Absolutely. That's precisely the kind of more powerful tooling that I was referring to. When MVC, ASP.NET MVC version 4 was introduced about a year ago, the official evangelism was pushing out, was emphasizing more aspects like, well, we bring Web API, we bring Bootstrap, we bring mobile templates, all kind of things that apparently were more attractive, more engaging to users. And the official, so to speak, evangelism, the official literature on MVC4 neglected, disregarded the only feature in MVC4 that, in my humble opinion, is worth the upgrade, and it's a feature called display modes, precisely what you were referring to. It allows you to essentially define multiple razor files, one per display mode, and a display mode is essentially a category of razor files that you want to be rendered when the engine detects that a particular device is requesting the page. So this allows you to define razor files for iPhone, Android, smartphones, tablets, large screens. It's up to you, the number of device classes you want to support in your app. And the MVC runtime automatically routes out of your control. It's free of charge for you to the right page depending on the device. Of course, for this to happen effectively, you are still responsible for, one, defining the classes of devices you want to support, so the number of display modes. Second, you are responsible for providing the business rules, so to speak. So you have to provide a Boolean expression, lambda in the end, that gets the HTTP context of the request and determines whether that request, based on the user agent, based on HTTP headers, falls in which of the predefined classes of devices. So that helps the runtime to pick up the right razor file. And in doing so, you probably need to endow yourself with some logic to process, to understand, to make sense of the user agent and HTTP headers.
Okay, awesome. So that's going to determine what actual view is rendered to the particular device category or the particular device type. So that's going to help a lot. So we're going to have different views for different device types. And then on each of those different views, we can then style them differently and use CSS media queries and viewport meta tags then that are targeted to those devices. How do you see that all working in together?
Once you are able, you have found the tools in the back end of your MVC website to figure out the device that is making the request. At that point, everything happens as usual. It's business as usual, in the sense that all you have to do is serving the right razor file. So it's just HTML in the end that you send down to the browser, to the requesting browser, but you know what kind of device is making the request, so you can intelligently serve just the markup right for that device. This represents a huge improvement in terms of bandwidth use, in terms of performance, in terms of just the user experience, because you can really serve probably half or a quarter of the markup to smartphones and more to tablets and even more to large screens. Usually, when it comes to this, you see immediately the difference between this approach, server-side based approach, and responsive web design, in the sense that in responsive web design, you typically start by creating the optimized view for the desktop. That's the most common approach. It's not the only one, but it's what happens most of the time. Yeah. And then you just stretch out that view to smaller devices. The download, the total amount of download is mostly the same for PCs and tablets, and maybe it's a little bit smaller if you're smart with smartphones, because you can probably use smaller images. But yeah, if the home page, say, takes 3 megs, you can hardly expect to download much less than 2 or 2.5 megs on a smartphone. So it's not really a big improvement. It's mostly the same, and it could be a lot of data to download for a smartphone. But with a server-side approach, if the smartphone just needs to take a very thin page, you get only the few Ks that are strictly requested. At the same time, there's another perspective of the same problem. What about large screens? Because we are used to typically consider the problem going from the largest screen being the desktop down to tablets, mini tablets, and smartphones. But there is also the other direction, which is smart TVs, Xbox screens, very large screens. Not necessarily when you have a 2000 by 2000 large screen, you're going to have the same experience. You might want to have a lot more information. You might want to reconsider completely the user experience and put more info. So it's just about defining how many views you want to offer of your site, and then reason on each views separately. And for this to happen effectively, responsive web design is just a low common denominator approach. You need something a lot more specific.
So it seems like responsive web design and server-side detection are mutually exclusive. Is that really true?
Sort of, in the sense that I think that we get it right in the moment in which we start really understanding the role in a possibly completely unbiased way, the role of responsive web design, which is essentially a methodology that originated to optimize the user experience on one fixed type of browser. So it was essentially the desktop browser, a window that you can resize, the user can resize at will, and as the user resizes the windows, the browser windows on the PC to a quarter of the screen or whatever it is, the content in the page adapts so that the user always has the best possible experience. If you take this approach further, you say, well, why not? If the size is the same as the typical size of a smartphone full screen window, I can have with one solution, I can have addressed several points. But you miss in doing so, you miss the specific use cases that you want to offer to your users on smartphones, tablets, and large screens. So back to the server-side solution. In the end, you serve HTML. So the HTML can still include responsive web design techniques. You can still have media queries, CSS media queries in the HTML you serve to smartphones or tablets or whatever it is. But for example, to give you a concrete scenario where this is really useful, the mix of server-side approach plus responsive web design. Consider tablets and mini tablets. You probably want to, most of the time, you don't distinguish between tablets and mini tablets, or you don't distinguish between smartphones, those which have a very large screen and those who have a very small screen but still smartphones. So still you have here a margin for stretching in and out the HTML, and nothing is better for this context than responsive web design, but responsive web design in the context of the same classes of devices.
Excellent. Sounds great. So ASP.NET 1.0 introduced the browser capabilities database, but that feature really hasn't coped with the explosion of mobile devices that are available. What's your recommendations around device detection? Because obviously we still need that to be able to serve up the correct mobile view.
I think that in order to understand the specific nature, the capabilities, to recognize correctly the requesting device, you need to resort to ad hoc tuning. It's not something you can reasonably think you can do in-house. I mean, if your problem is simply that of detecting whether an iPhone or maybe an Android device is making a call to your website, you can, with a simple algorithm of string manipulation, just looking for specific keywords in a string, in the user agent string, you can easily understand it's an iPod, it's an iPad, it's an iPhone, and that's fine. But that's okay just for iOS. But what about Android? You find the word Android nearly everywhere. You can hardly recognize it is a tablet or mini tablet or whatever. You can look for things like GT dash, Galaxy Tab dash, which you find all in Galaxy tabs. Okay, this is an Android tablet. But at that point, if you start going on with your own algorithm to look for keywords in user agents to create your own classification of devices, you run into what was the browser hell 10 years ago, and you got crazy and you got lost in the labyrinth of thousands and thousands of devices. If we had the browser hell of 10 years ago, with only about 10, maybe 12, maybe different browsers, i.e. this, i.e. that, Netscape this, Netscape that, and so forth. Imagine what the hell it could be with mobile devices where the order of magnitude is thousands, if not tens of thousands. So you need professional toolings. What kind of tools? There are a few products, one of which is called Wooful. Wooful is a database. Technically, it's called a Device Description Repository, DDR. Essentially, it's a database that contains information about the known capabilities of devices. Wooful is probably the most popular one, but it's not the only one. Wooful is popular because it's cross-platform. It works. It has an API for Java, C++, Ruby, .NET, of course, PHP, and it's because it is the tool that a couple of organizations use, like Facebook, Google. So if it works for this kind of guys, big shots, it can work probably also for any other company. With Wooful, you make just in .NET, for example, just a simple call that receives, processes the user agent, and using the internal API that it's written by experts, not by you, it gets you a list of capabilities. But the point is that these capabilities about the device are known capabilities. So it's not something that can be tested, checked directly, because not all capabilities in mobiles can be tested. You can hardly test programmatically via JavaScript maybe whether a given device supports streaming in MP4. You have to know whether it works or not. You have to rely on someone. You have to trust someone telling you, hey, look, on this device, you are not recommended to stream MP4, and things like that.
Excellent. That sounds great. So we've talked about responsive web design, and we've talked about the ability to detect what device that or the type of device we're rendering to, and then to render a different view based on that category of device. But what about the situation where we're dealing with different workflows depending on the different device? So obviously now we're looking at a different level of complexity if we're rendering a different workflow with 14 steps for a mobile checkout as opposed to a desktop checkout where it might only be 3 steps. What's your recommendations around that?
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to implementing a mobile solution, website mobile solution that involves interaction with the user, I think that as an architect, you should stop and actually figure out what would be the best possible user experience for users on each type of each class of device you intend to support. So if I have to outline sort of a strategy for the architect and the team to go, I would say first step is define the number of devices, number of different views you want to provide. I like to call this approach device-driven in a way, architecture, device-driven design.
Yep.
So you start by defining, okay, I want to support smartphones, tablets, whatever it is. You have a list, 3, 4, 5, 6, not that many different views you want to offer. Fine. Once you have that defined, focus on for each of those on what would be in terms of use cases, in terms of the expected interaction between the user and the machine, between the actors, just to use a UML, because use case comes from UML. In UML, there's the term actor, interaction between the actors. What would be the ideal way for actors to work together for each of the supported device? And this involves creating different mocks, creating and testing with users through these different mocks. And a mock is a different UI in the end, summing up together to a different experience once implemented. In terms of layers and software, a different mock, a different UI points to different view model objects, because the data that comes in and out of each view is probably different. So smartphones carry on and in and out of the UI an amount of info which is different from the amount of info being exchanged through a tablet, PC, or whatever it is. These view models should be gathered together in a library that you share, and this brings to creating application layers, which could, in the worst case, be different for each scenario, because application layer is where you orchestrate calls, and the application layer is where you have the implementation of the use cases you have on a given UI. So if you have a significantly different UI between, say, smartphones and tablets, you probably want to have a specific application layers, maybe just a couple of classes, nothing necessarily big, for tablets and smartphones. And the application layer then, in the end, works with a common, unique, unified backend. We can call it the business layer, we can call it the domain layer, it depends. But there's still at some point something shared and that provides the backbone of the application. But the key, the focus has to be in the presentation layer, and that has to be specific, as I say things, between each classes of devices you want to support.
Excellent. It's interesting because I think there's a tendency amongst so-called back-end web developers to avoid some of the more user-facing UI topics like responsive web design. But it's interesting based on what you've just said. Do you think responsive web design is something that you think that should be the focus of just designers and HTML guys, or is it something that the C# crowd should be spending more time on?
I like to use a kind of to coin a kind of a new expression. Instead of responsive web design, I like to call it responsive web experience, in the sense that the key point is providing an experience tailor-made for the device.
Yep.
For this to happen, when it comes to the physical implementation of this responsive web experience, I think that it could be done both entirely on the client, as well as using a mix of server and client. The key point I see is the availability of an API that allows you to detect, to identify in a very precise way the requesting device. Today, at the moment, Wooful and similar products are exclusively server-side. So At that point, you need to have a back end. Could be a MVC, could be classic web forms, could be PHP, could be whatever. So on the server, you get the user agent, you get the HTTP request, you figure out what is the requesting device, and then you serve back to the requesting browser intelligently the best possible markup. But maybe in the future, in the near future also, it could be that the same API that you today check on the server can grab the user agent via JavaScript and expose via JavaScript the same set of capabilities. At that point, I see no reasons for not creating single-page apps entirely JavaScript-based, entirely client-side, to switch to create on the fly the most appropriate view depending on the device.
Awesome. That's great. So what do you think are the most common mistakes that you see with respect to mobile targeting?
I think that focusing too much on taking responsive web design for the holy grail of mobile development. That is the biggest mistake, I think. I have nothing against responsive web design. I use responsive web design in many of the websites that my company and the company I consult for use. So it still makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't have to be taken as the only possible way. It's not the holy grail, period.
It's only part of the solution. So I guess that's kind of your general message is responsive web design is great, but it's only part of the solution.
Perfect. Agreed. Deal. You said it.
Excellent, Dino. Thank you very much for joining us today. If we want to get more into learning about the complete story of mobile targeting, what's a reason? What do you think is a resource? Where should people go to find out some more great information?
A couple of years ago, when I started seriously to get involved in the mobile world, I figured out that, in first place for myself, that I was needing strict need for an information that was general enough to cover nearly all aspects, the whole spectrum of the mobile kind of thing, but it was not deep enough to make me an expert in Android, iOS, this or that. So I made a point of creating a resource in the form of a book that attempts to explain to developers, managers, to nearly everybody, what is really important to know when it comes to mobile, whether it is iOS, Android, Windows Phone, mobile, phone gap, hybrid solutions, whatever. So I think that still this book, Architecting Mobile Solutions for the Enterprise, is still probably the best resource. And trust me, it's not because it's my book. I would have loved to find this book written by someone else, because it would have saved me the effort of researching and writing it. And this effort, yeah, it's been a pleasure, but I could have spent my time doing more interesting and even rewarding kind of things.
Excellent. So we'll definitely get people to go and check out the look. Look, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your experiences building mobile applications for the enterprise. And I look forward to having you go on the show again soon.
Sure. Just call me. I'm here. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.